But I gotta say, and I'm friendly with the ladies on The View, but they didn't say anything about this week. Nothing. You know, because it's never been their thing to weigh in on the issues.
Y'all really think we weren't gonna talk about Jimmy Kimmel? I mean, have you watched the show over the last 29 seasons? So you know, no one silences us.
So, Whoopi and the crew on The View are practically spiraling right now. And honestly, it's kind of hilarious to watch. Just last week, Bill Maher threw shade at them, mocking the show for being too timid, too nervous, to even touch Jimmy Kimmel's latest controversy. The irony? A show built on speaking out suddenly afraid to speak at all.
I'm friendly with the ladies on The View, but they didn't say anything about this week. Nothing. You know, because it's never been their thing to weigh in on the issues. You know, it's just an upbeat party show. That's why they hired people named Joy and Sonny and Whoopi. But you know, girls, let me go out strong, okay? It won't. Yeah, I promise. It's happened to me, and I may go out after this show. We don't know. We don't.
The View has built its brand on pouncing at every juicy headline the moment it breaks. Think back just a few weeks ago. I even showed you that clip of a former panelist admitting they sometimes have only a couple of hours to prepare before diving headfirst into the day's hottest controversies. That's their thing. Quick reactions, bold takes, constant chatter. Which is exactly why audiences were floored when, right after Jimmy Kimmel's suspension, the show went live acting as if nothing had happened. ABC had literally pulled Kimmel off the air, yet the panel carried on in silence. Bill Maher didn't hold back, slamming them for being too cautious, too protective of their cushy seats. But then came the curveball. The View finally broke the silence. And what they revealed? Absolutely unbelievable.
Y'all really think we weren't gonna talk about Jimmy Kimmel? I mean, have you watched the show over the last 29 seasons? So you know, no one silences us. And to all my friends in Italy who reached out, you have to know it's okay, we're still here, we're still broadcasting. And when the news broke last week about Jimmy Kimmel's suspension, we took a breath to see if Jimmy was going to say anything about it first. We did the same thing with Stephen Colbert.
That's simply not true, and in just a moment, I'll break down exactly why The View finally decided to weigh in on Jimmy Kimmel's situation. But let's clear up this narrative floating around, the idea that they paused out of respect for Kimmel, or that they acted the same way during Stephen Colbert's scandal, is nothing more than spin. It's a convenient story, but it doesn't hold up under the slightest scrutiny. Let's rewind. The moment Colbert was fired, The View didn't wait for official statements or carefully worded press releases. No hesitation. They dove headfirst into commentary, criticism, and fiery hot takes. And let's be honest, since when has Whoopi Goldberg or any of her co-hosts ever held back to avoid controversy? Exactly never. Which is why Whoopi's claim collapses the second you look at it closely. No need to drag this out. Roll the clip and see for yourself how it really unfolded.
Then our show was on tape on Friday. But we are live here today. And we're getting into it now. You cannot like a show. Now, I want to make sure I got this right. To be clear, you cannot like a show and it can go off the air. Someone can say something they shouldn't and get taken off the air. But the government cannot apply pressure to force someone to be silent.
Did you catch how unusually cautious Whoopi was while reading that statement? It was almost comical, like watching someone walk on eggshells, terrified that the slightest slip could land them in serious trouble, maybe even cost them the chair she's held for years. And let's be real, since when has Whoopi Goldberg ever been known for strictly clinging to a teleprompter? Exactly. Never. She's built a career on being bold, outspoken, and unfiltered. So when that tough exterior cracked and her delivery came off shaky and rehearsed, it exposed more than she probably intended. And here's where it gets interesting. Jimmy Kimmel is already back on ABC after what now looks like a short, almost symbolic suspension. Which explains everything. The View only spoke up once they knew the coast was clear, when there was no real risk. Suddenly their silence turned to courage, all while Bill Maher kept throwing jabs, calling them out for the act.
The FCC says they're going to go after maybe next the View. They got a new show lined up. It's going to be great. It's called Morning Wood with James Wood.
Bill Maher didn't pull any punches. He outright mocked The View, joking that after Jimmy Kimmel's suspension, maybe they'd be the next ones swapped out for something fresher in the daytime lineup. And honestly, that jab hits harder than some might admit, because the thought had crossed my mind too. Now, let me be clear, I'm not waving the Cancel The View banner here. Like them or not, the show has carved out its spot in daytime television history. They're a fixture. But that's exactly why this pattern is so frustrating. Time and again, the panel fires off hot takes without stopping to verify a single detail. They'll twist a headline, inflate a scandal, and serve it up as fact before the dust has even begun to settle. That's not courage, it's recklessness dressed up as boldness. And if this situation proves anything, it's that credibility matters. Because if they keep gambling with the truth, Maher's punchline won't stay a joke. It could become a preview of what's to come. And yes, in the same breath, Maher threw a dart at Jimmy Kimmel, too.
And, Jimmy, look, I don't think what he said was exactly right. I don't. We don't agree on that. He didn't lose his job for it. He said the MAGA crowd was trying to characterize the as anything but one of them. Because the 22-year-old kid, his family was MAGA. As if a 22-year-old with a trans girlfriend never rebelled against their family.
Credit where it's due, Bill Maher stands out as practically the only voice on the left bold enough to say what everyone else tiptoed around. Jimmy was flat out wrong. While Maher called it as he saw it, nearly every other comedian went into damage control mode, bending over backward to defend Kimmel's remarks, spinning them as harmless, insisting there was nothing remotely offensive to see. The contrast couldn't be more striking.
But was he on the left? I don't know that either. And I hate to do this. I'm tipping the end of the show, which I work so hard on to keep a secret from the rest of the show. But it's too relevant. What I'm talking about at the end, I'm going to have to say now, which is that it is a fool's errand to try to say that these nuts who do these things are any team.
But was he really part of the left? Honestly, I can't say that with certainty, and here's where I have to break one of my own rules. I hate doing this, because I usually save certain points for the end of the show, carefully building toward them like a reveal. But this one is simply too relevant to hold back. So here it is, trying to lump these people, these unpredictable, off-the-rails voices, into one political team is a fool's errand. They don't play by consistent rules, and they certainly don't stay neatly within one camp. Pretending otherwise just clouds the truth.
But, look at what this guy is doing. I mean, Jimmy has every right to be wrong, but look at this guy. He was doing porn video games with furries. He was on a game called Furry Shades of Gay 3. This kid is in his basement with VR goggles on, getting virtually by a cartoon wombat? And you're gonna put politics into...
Maher cut straight through the noise, slicing past all the spin that had been swirling around the situation. He said plainly what others were too cautious to admit: Jimmy went too far. But at the same time, Maher argued that it wasn't nearly enough to warrant losing his job. And honestly, he's right on both counts. Kimmel didn't deserve to be fired, and technically, he wasn't. What ABC handed down was little more than a slap on the wrist, a short suspension dressed up as if it were some grand act of accountability. Let's be real, that punishment wasn't about discipline at all. It was about optics, ABC scrambling to save face, to look like they were taking action, all while knowing full well they had every intention of bringing him back. Maher called it for exactly what it was. And that level of honesty, rare as it may be, instantly set him apart from the crowd.
This kid doesn't belong in either party. He belongs in a straitjacket. He's an outpatient who should not be out. But you have the right to be wrong or to have any opinion you want. That's what the First Amendment is all about. I was defending it last week on this show against what they're doing in England against the left. Come on, guys, be fair.
Bill Maher didn't let up. He kept the heat on Jimmy Kimmel with biting, sarcastic jabs, zeroing in on Kimmel's rush to immediately pin the blame on MAGA. The message behind Maher's humor was crystal clear. Jimmy should have taken a breath, done his homework, and checked the facts before politicizing a tragedy just to rack up easy applause. A few minutes of research could have spared him the embarrassment of humiliating himself in front of a national audience. Had he slowed down, he would have seen that the incident didn't align neatly with any political ideology. There was no MAGA connection, no partisan agenda, just the actions of a deeply disturbed individual. But instead, Kimmel, eager to surf the anti-MAGA wave, jumped in without evidence. And that's exactly why Maher's mockery cut so deep, because it rang true. Jimmy's knee-jerk reaction wasn't just sloppy. It exposed him as partisan, reckless, and more interested in scoring points than seeking truth. Ultimately, Maher's point reached far beyond Kimmel. Facts will always matter more than spin.
Organization. Antifa is a broad designation with no identifiable leader and no observable plan, like the Democrats. So, Jimmy, let me just say, pal, you did a great, funny show for 2 decades. You should be proud of that. If this firing goes for you the way it did for me, you'll get 23 years on a better net.
Okay, let's pause for a moment and really break this down. The driving force behind Jimmy Kimmel being yanked from late-night TV wasn't simply about what he said, it was about the money. The instant he launched into those anti-MAGA remarks, Disney, the parent company of ABC, felt the shockwaves. And this wasn't some minor market hiccup. Reports show Disney's stock slid nearly 2% in a matter of hours, wiping out close to $4 billion in market value. That kind of loss doesn't just raise eyebrows, it sets off alarm bells in boardrooms and investor calls alike. Executives weren't scrambling because of outrage or morality. They were scrambling because billions were vanishing. ABC didn't suspend Kimmel to make a principled stand. They did it to plug the leak, to stop the financial bleeding before it got worse. At the end of the day, this wasn't discipline, it was damage control. And Kimmel's short-lived suspension? That was less about punishment and more about appeasing Wall Street, a calculated sacrifice to safeguard Disney's bottom line.
Disney is letting the so-called comedy show return after a week's suspension. Some broadcasters are refusing to let his show back on air. Nexstar Media Group, which is the largest local TV broadcasting company in the US, announced that its stations will focus on continuing to produce local news and other programming relevant to their respective markets. What good news. Look, the company says, we made a decision last week to preempt Jimmy Kimmel Live following what ABC referred to as Mr. Kimmel's ill-timed and insensitive comments at a critical time in our national discourse. We stand by that decision, pending assurance that all parties are committed to fostering an environment of respectful, constructive dialogue.
Maher wasn't about to wrap up his monologue without firing a few shots at the Democratic Party, and honestly, can you blame him? Ever since their crushing defeat in last year's elections, the DNC has looked less like a polished political machine and more like a traveling circus, stumbling over itself just to stay in the spotlight. The difference is striking. Gone are the days of a unified front with a clear leader and a coherent strategy. In their place, we see confusion. No singular figure to rally around, no consistent message to inspire voters, no sense of direction. Instead, the party seems to lean on theatrics, headline-chasing stunts, shallow gestures, and flashy antics, hoping to keep their base entertained rather than engaged. And that's exactly why Maher's critique landed so hard. It wasn't exaggerated, it was obvious. The Democrats aren't steering the national conversation anymore. They're scrambling after it, fumbling for identity, and waiting almost desperately for someone strong enough to take the reins.
It also comes after Sinclair, the broadcasting company that makes up America's largest ABC affiliate groups, announced that it would be preempting Jimmy Kimmel Live across ABC affiliate stations and replacing it with news programming. And you know what? They know that the audience has had enough of Jimmy Kimmel. Let's just look back at some of his comedy content. Here he is celebrating when they tried to censor Donald Trump.
Trump has been suspended from Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and even Snapchat. But don't worry, Mr. President, there are still plenty of apps you do have access to. You still have Spotify to drown out the sound of millions of people cheering as you leave. You still have Pet Finder since you're on the outs with Mike Pence. You have Cameo, which will soon be your primary source of income.
So, what does all of this really reveal? Jimmy Kimmel's suspension, Bill Maher's razor-sharp critiques, and The View's nervous spin don't just tell the story of a late-night host stumbling over his own words. They shine a light on something far bigger, an intersection of money, influence, and a cultural climate that feels like it's reaching a breaking point. Disney didn't suspend Kimmel as some grand act of moral accountability. They did it because billions evaporated from their market cap in a single day. That kind of loss doesn't just sting, it terrifies executives and rattles shareholders. Meanwhile, The View only found its voice once the coast was clear, proving that their so-called boldness was little more than staged bravado. Then there's Maher. Love him or hate him, he stood apart, one of the few willing to say the obvious, even if it meant aiming the criticism at his own side. And now, even media partners are beginning to hesitate, reluctant to tie themselves to Kimmel's baggage. The fear is simple. The backlash may outweigh the benefit. What we're witnessing isn't just a momentary controversy. It's a signal that the old formula, the endless theatrics, the curated outrage, is starting to lose its grip on audiences who are no longer buying what the media is selling.